I'm Abby Ostfeld, and I'm a Business Development Manager for our Test and Data Management Solutions and Tools here at dSPACE Inc. And I work with customers on finding solutions that will work to refine and optimize their vehicle validation and testing processes. As I am sure some of you already know, validating each component of a vehicle is key for functional safety and is required by many regulations we need to meet in order to get our software-defined vehicles on the road. To validate, we must meet each requirement through a series of tests and so on. So how do we manage all of the data that is created in order to meet those requirements? Today, we'll explore the utilization of the dSPACE Test Solutions package, along with the integration of an Application Lifecycle Management tool, also known as ALM. Each test facility will have their own unique set of validation needs and processes that they're using, different group dynamics, as well as different testing platforms that they use. Commonly, we see similarities for a lot of customers that we support and the challenges that they're facing with their testing tool chains. Some of those challenges include, how are we going to meet and manage all of the testing requirements that we have, along with the variations of the tests that are needed for different vehicle components that are used and the different use cases for those components. Also, how are we going to collaborate and share this data across the varying teams with different levels of users? And how are we going to do all that while also being efficient and getting the most out of our test facility? We try to address all the issues by providing a central location to store and manage all test data where varying users with different user roles and tasks can come to collaborate. The dSPACE Test Solutions package also offers a toolchain where all data is connected so we can establish traceability at each level and make the toolchain ISO 26262 compliant. The Test Solutions package also introduces continuous testing, making an agile process easier to accomplish and allowing us to run as efficiently as possible on all testing platforms, such as Hill or Mill, along with the option to even run 24/7 if our test facility allows. Now let's talk about each of the different components in the Test Solutions package. First, we have SYNECT, which is our test and data management server that acts as the heart and central location for all of our users to come and collaborate on all test data. We then have Automation Desk, which is our test execution software. And in between those two, we have our test authoring framework, or our TAF, which ties together the use of Automation Desk inside of SYNECT. It's also a central location to access the test data to use while authoring our test cases, and connects everything together so we can get that traceability across our entire toolchain. SYNECT can act as its own requirement manager, but it also has an open API that allows for integration of most any third-party ALM tools, such as the Siemens application Polarion. Customers often come to us with an already established ALM in use, Polarion being one of the more commonly used among our currently supported customers. We do offer the use of many third-party ALM integrations, not just Polarion, but today we'll be working with Polarion. As I said, it's more commonly used. We can also work with customers to establish an integration that will work with whatever other tools they may be using in their testing toolchain now. SYNECT is our server-based application that allows for one or more clients to connect to the same database to access and work on the same data. SYNECT provides the capability of users setting up, managing their own users, and each user access rights. Because we can share data and set up access for specific users, this avoids having us have multiple file copies across these varying teams and avoid the hassle of tracking those down when needed. It means that we can also reuse already established testing data across multiple projects, saving time when setting up and executing our validation tests. In this example, you'll see that we have a global distributed team where we have a few different groups accessing one central server. One team in North America may be in charge of reviewing the requirements, setting up test cases that need to be validated, and then scheduling those tests to be ran then on our hills. Whereas we have the other team across the globe who are then in charge of receiving the scheduled tests and then executing them on our hills. Once the test execution data is completed and pushed to the SYNECT server, the whole team, whether that's in North America or wherever else in the globe, has access to review the data and create custom reports that they can share. Now let's break down SYNECT further into its infrastructure and the different modules available. At the heart of SYNECT, we have the SQL Server database where all of our test data is located. Going out from there, we have the SYNECT base where the users who have this can access the database and all the test data there within the database, as well as set up and manage user rights, as well as version control. Going out from there, we then have our variant management, as well as our workflow management. Within the workflow management, you can define and manage complex workflows, including variations of tests, as well as scheduling to even automate our test facilities. And finally, on our outer infrastructure here, we have signal and parameter management, model management, and test management, where we'll be spending more of our discussion today. Within the test management, you can manage your test cases, as well as your execution plans and the test results that come out of it. Automation Desk supports the use of graphical, signal-based, and script-based test development. So let's talk a little bit about how we execute our tests and set those up. So for the graphical test development, as you see in our first image on the left here, there is a UI where users can come and drag and drop test blocks into a flowchart style test sequence workspace. There's also the option to then integrate 100% script-based testing as well for those who are already testing based on custom written scripts for tests. There's then the signal-based testing, which is a test set up based on specific signals and set points to then capture and evaluate data. Automation Desk also allows for the integration of Python scripts into an individual test sequence block, handling more custom items that are not supported in the functions provided within the library browser, as you'll see here on the right. The more complex the testing, the more complex the flowchart will be to manage and maintain then within Automation Desk. There's also a small learning curve to Automation Desk, which requires training to understand the tool to gain basic knowledge for using the application. This is why we've created the Test Authoring Framework, or TAF. TAF is an add-on to SYNECT and used within the SYNECT application to access the use of Automation Desk and schedule tests to be done within Automation Desk. It is a tabular user interface that also has similar drag and drop functionality as Automation Desk does, but any level of user can easily come into the application and adapt to and learn how to use the TAF framework, even without prior programming experience. We can optimize our custom libraries within here, as well as our test cases in the application. We can also work on different models for the same test cases. Users can easily share test execution steps across projects for reusability, ultimately saving time in our development process. Since the test data pool is all accessible on our one central SYNECT server, it is easier to maintain multiple projects here as well. Since the TAF exists as an in-between for SYNECT and Automation Desk, we have the test management capabilities integrated alongside Automation Desk so that we can centrally manage our parameters and our testing variants. A web-based version of TAF is also available for even more remote accessibility for the SYNECT clients to connect and come and author tests. To set up a TAF authored test within Automation Desk, a SYNECT block is added to the Automation Desk test sequence to reference our test case or cases. We can set up one sequence block to run one test case or iterate many test cases to be ran to cut down our execution time. In TAF, we can then schedule our test or tests on one or many Automation Desk PCs across a test field, and even configure our test field to run 24/7. Let's take a step back now to get a full picture of managing our test components by mapping everything together better inside of SYNECT, our central database server. In SYNECT, we take our requirements, map these to test cases with their testing parameters, then we set these test cases to be executed so we can capture results and analyze them for final validation. On its own, SYNECT can act as its own requirement management system, but we can also feed the requirements from a third-party ALM source thanks to the Open API. Again, we will demonstrate specifically this using the Polarion ALM today, but we do support many other ALM tools as well, as you can see here. Since we are integrating the ALM into our testing toolchain, we then also extend our traceability to the data in the ALM as well, giving us that ISO 26262 compliance. Now let's get into an example of how we can make our test toolchain more efficient. Here's an example of running one test case on one hill where the execution time takes about 2 minutes. We then go and evaluate our results on an offline PC, taking about 4 minutes. If we were to then come into the TAF and create some kind of iteration where we can manage and execute multiple tests and test cases, we can then execute those on one hill in an iteration of multiple test cases to be ran sequentially. As each of these test cases are executed and completed, our post-processing is constantly being updated, and the results are consistently being fed back into our master data manager, which in this case here is SYNECT. Ultimately, we are saving time here. In the first example, we're taking about 7 hours of our time to execute just as many test cases as we are on the right, where we would spend about 3 hours comparatively to 7 hours to run 100 test cases. Ultimately, here we can save about 58% of our hill time and usage. After we run our test executions and receive a validation status, whether the test passed or failed, we can then review the results in the database using the SYNECT client. A web-based dashboard is also available that is configurable and also viewable from any SYNECT client that has the capability of connecting to our SYNECT server. Now let's go over to a live demonstration of how we'll integrate our Polarion ALM into SYNECT, write a test case execution plan, and then execute that test to then be pushed back up into SYNECT server and then into our ALM to close the loop. Now that we've discussed the introduction of the basics on our test solutions package and the whole toolchain, let's actually demonstrate how we're going to use that and utilize our integration of the ALM tool. So first we're going to go into Polarion, and when you log in, this is the landing page that you'll see. And we're not going to go into too many details on how to use Polarion today, but we're going to go down and we're going to take a look at our requirements in our work items down here. So I'm going to click on our system requirements, and here you'll see we have quite a list of requirements that are supposed to be met in order to validate our process. Let's just select one at random. And down below here will give us a little bit of the details of the requirement, a description, as well as all of the linked work items that are going to be related to that requirement and what is going to be needed for full validation of that requirement. So let's just quickly go now into the test cases and also just review a little bit about those that relate then back to the requirements. As I said, there will be different requirements that have different needs and links, but usually we'll have test cases that we need to perform in order to validate that requirement. So we just have a short list here that you'll see. So for example, here we have the drive pilot will disengage when our brake is manually engaged. And if I scroll down below, we'll see in the linked work items area that we have that it verifies this requirement here, DP317. So now that we've kind of taken a little bit of a look at our Polarion ALM tool, we're going to close out of that and we're going to go now into SYNECT and talk about the basics of SYNECT. Now that we have SYNECT open, when you first come into the landing page here, you're going to need to first connect to a database. Your database is going to have all of your testing data, as well as any of the requirements that are going to be linked to your test cases, your test executions, as well as your test results. Since I already have a database configured, all I need to do is come into here and select Connect to Test Database. Down below, you'll see here we have a list of messages, and in those messages is just some helpful information, whether there is just some info. So, for example, we see here that we've connected successfully to our SYNECT database, or there may be some warnings or errors depending on the types of messages that pop up and what we need to do to resolve those errors or messages. So now we'll come up above here and we see that we have our navigator that's empty currently. Within our navigator is going to be our workspaces, and within our workspaces is all of our projects, as well as all of the test requirements and test data that is related to that project. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open a workspace. If I didn't have one available, I would simply select New Workspace. As you'll see here, I have already a workspace available, and to select that one and to open it, I'm going to double click here. And we'll close this tab. So now you'll see on the left-hand side here, we have the navigation pane that has populated with all of the test data within that workspace. Let's just go through each of the different components of our workspace that we have already actually kind of mentioned before in our presentation. These are our different modules. So first we have our requirements management, where all of our requirements will live. And within the requirement management, I can actually create multiple projects. So in this case, we already have a project set up, and that project is called Demo Setup here. And if we expand that, we can go in and we can view the project summary, as well as all of the requirements that may exist within that project. So here, after we've opened the requirement documents, we see that we already have some system requirements that have been imported from Polarion. For the sake of this demonstration, we're going to import some more Polarion requirements. To do so, we're going to come up into this option here that says Polarion Requirements and select that. We'll then see this pop up where we will have to enter our credentials in order to log into our Polarion connection. Since I already have a project that I've selected, I'm going to go ahead now into our work item types, and I'm going to select Software Requirements. Within our software requirements, we have quite a few different requirements that we can import. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of these to be imported into our database. So now we hit Import. And now you'll see that our software requirements have imported and have populated into our navigator. So let's go ahead and double click on this and verify that our requirements now exist within the database. Let's go ahead and move on to our signal and parameter management, but we'll eventually come back and review our requirement management later. So next, we have the signal and parameter management. In the signal and parameter management, we have a couple different options where you can go ahead and you can set up and configure signal and parameters for your entire testing field to be used globally, or you can also select to create just local used ones for maybe a specific project that you're working on, but don't necessarily need to share with everyone else. Next, we're going to move down into our test management module. And within here, if we expand this out, again, you can set up a project, and within that project, we can review the project summary with some of the different properties related to that project. Going through this list, then, we also see we have test cases, as well as the evaluation functions, execution plans, as well as the executions, evaluations, our test case results, and evaluation function results, and our interactive reporting. For the sake of today, we're mainly going to focus on our test cases as well as our executions so that we can set up a test case, author that test, and then execute the test. We're going to do that in just a moment, but first, let's go ahead and import a test case. As you'll see, we already have quite a few test cases that have already been imported from our Polarion integration. But now let's go ahead and import some test cases from our software requirements that we had just imported. So go ahead and select Import Test Cases. And again, you'll see this pop up where you'll have to enter in your credentials. You'll select the software test cases that relate to our software requirements. And then again, you can either select one or you can select multiple. And in this case, we're just going to select all of our work items, as you'll see here. If I go down into my messages, I now see that we've imported our test cases successfully. We'll come back to our test management in just a second, but let's go into our final module here, which is our variant management. And within variant management, you can come in and manage the different variations of tests based on the type of platform that you're performing, as well as the type of tests you may be performing across multiple projects. Again, we're not going to get into that too much today, so let's go back up into our test management and let's take a look further into our test cases. As you can see in the middle here, we have our full list of our test cases, which is easily searchable as well as filterable. So for this case, I'm going to filter on our Polarion test case ID so that I can pick a specific one. Going down this list, we can look as well and see we already have a test that has been run and has failed, so therefore it has not been validated for the requirement. Let's just take a quick look while we're here at the properties of this requirement. On the right side, you'll see here we have a list of properties that relates to this test case and can also show us a little bit more information, not just about the test case, but about the requirement that it also relates to. In our properties, we have a Polarion property where we can review not only the test case information, but also the requirement that it's related to. So here we have the Polarion requirement ID so that we can link back to that at any time. Now let's go ahead and talk about creating an execution for a test case so that we can validate that test case to then verify our requirement. Here I'm going to select DP415, or if I expand this out, it says the drive pilot shall implement a braking lever control for all vehicles and ... Here, if I want to go ahead and create a test case, I can go ahead and right click and I can open the TAF from this menu, or you can look in the ribbon above and you can find that there is a TA framework option as well. Here I can go ahead and select Manage My Test Steps, where I will then launch the TAF framework so that we can author the test to execution. Now that we have the TAF open, let's just go through a little bit of what the TAF is first, and then get into a little bit about how this test case is going to be executed. So on the left-hand side here, you'll see we have a list of function types, and if you expand each of those, there are multiple functions under each. Here you can just drag and drop the function into any part of the test phase, and you can also select the star here for any functions that you find that you use more often to be saved into your favorites down below. In this menu of functions as well, there's the libraries that you can create, and you can also drag and drop into your test sequences, or you can create commonly used sequences of different functions to also be drag and dropped into your test step. Now, as you'll see in the middle, we actually already have some test steps created for this test case, so we don't really have to do much for this test case, but we will come in and we're going to select one of these test steps so that you can see on the right-hand side, when you select a test step, the properties for that test step will then display on the right. In these properties, you will see the variables that relate, as well as any of the triggers that need to be set, the duration for how long we need to capture this result, etc. Down below, you'll also see we have a variable menu where you can drag and drop more variables to be captured in this test step. Within this menu, you can go ahead and filter based on the type of variable that you're looking for, or you can also search by name as well. If you were to go into this menu, we also have local variables that you could create if you only needed to create some variables that you might use in your own project. And finally, in this middle section here, above, like I mentioned, are our test steps. And in our test steps, we have a couple different phases. First being initialization, the second being execution, our third being the evaluation step, and finally our cleanup phase. Down below, you'll see we have a message window, much like we did in SYNECT, that will give us some information on if we need to improve something, if we have a warning that needs to be fixed, or some kind of error within our test steps. And finally, if I were to click on a test step, I can also come in here and create comments as well. This is great for if you're sharing and you're reusing this test sequence or test case in other projects, or maybe sharing it with a colleague as well. Now we're ready to go ahead and execute this test case. Since we didn't change anything, we don't really need to save, but the great part about TAF is when you go and exit, it's going to ask if you want to save just in case. So we're just going to say save just to be sure. So now that we're back in SYNECT, we're going to go ahead and try to create an execution from that test case. As you can see in our messages below, it tells us that it was updated successfully based on how we saved it in TAF. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click again on that test case, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to select the TA framework again, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to say create execution from selected test case. This window will pop up, which allows us then to configure how we want our test case to be set up. So I'm going to name this demo 123. And now I'll come down and select the variant configuration based on the platform that we're going to use today, which is VIOS, which is our software in the loop application. I then come down and select the location where I want my data to be stored once the execution is completed. And again, select my platform based on what we're going to be using today, which is VIOS. If you come down to the last option here, we have the capability to select multiple machines or a specific machine for this execution to be run on. Since I only have my machine available, we're going to select the current machine, and we're going to hit OK. Now that I have created this execution, it'll go ahead and it'll tell me that there is a pending execution available and is stuck in the planned state until I do something about it. So we're going to right-click now on that planned execution. I'm going to come into this execute menu. I'm going to select to execute, and I'm going to select then to use Automation Desk as my plugin where it will then be executed. Once I hit OK, you'll see this menu pop up. The great part about using SYNECT and TAF alongside of Automation Desk is that we don't have to actually open Automation Desk. TAF will go ahead and open Automation Desk for us and run the test while showing us this user interface that'll update us on how far the test has come along, as well as what the verdict is for that test. If I had multiple test cases, I would see each of those as well as the verdict and the status of what it's running at. So we'll just give it a second here to go ahead and run. Now I'll see that my test execution has been completed, and I also see that the test passed with 100% being successful. In order to save this result to my database, I have to come down here and I have to select to OK. Selecting OK, I now have no pending executions, but if I go into this Finish Executions tab, I will see that my demo 123 test has finished and was executed. And I also see that it was 100% passed. So now, as we'll see here, we have our finished executions in the state of being finished. And we can also see here if the test execution passed, as well as a couple other details if you scroll over to the right. Now, let's go ahead and submit this result to be imported into our Polarion ALM system so that we can close the loop and have a full traceable testing toolchain. So I'll go ahead and right-click on that test execution. I'll go ahead and find my Polarion option down below, and then I'll select Push Verdicts to Polarion. And like with our import, we're going to have to log in again to verify our credentials. And once we do that, we're going to then navigate to our project, which happens to be Demo Project, if you'll recall. Hit Next. Now it has completed the import to our ALM. And so we can select Yes here, and it'll take us directly to Polarion, where our test execution has now been imported. And as you can see, the status has been approved because we have finished our verification of that test case, and it was successful in passing.
If there's something that we didn't cover today, or you want some more information based off the presentation that we had, please feel free to reach out to your dSPACE representative. So thank you.
dSPACE, your partner in simulation and validation.